This is Urban Lens. One-on-one interviews with breaking artists and the history of art itself.
Basquiat, Picasso, Emory Douglas, Rembrandt, Motley,
Georgia O'Keeffe,
Kadir Nelson,
Luis Bourgeois,
Michelangelo,
Yayoi Kazama,
Donatello,
Agnes Martin,
Da Vinci,
Faith Ringgold,
Van Gogh,
Frida Kahlo,
Gauguin,
Yoko Ono.
Romer Bearden.
And I like music where you can hear the problem solving, and I'm problem solving as I listen to the music. So that's why the trippy stuff comes in. It's like, I'm trying to create sort of the if there was a call and response, the call from the music, my response would be on the canvas, right? So I'll even take a break and dance around the room a little bit, But it's really, to me, it's like if I came from that background. I mean, I can't ignore it. It's part of my DNA.
And sitting with me is someone who I've known, I wouldn't say, I can't sit here and say it's been forever, but for some time now I've known about her work. I've seen her work for years, for decades, I want to say. And unbeknownst to me, she created one of the murals that I've DJ'd in front of in Adams Morgan. And we'll get into that later on in the show. But first I want to introduce artist Kelly Posey. Kelly, welcome to Urban Lens Podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you very much. In case anyone is actually unfamiliar with her work, Kelly created murals in the 90s. I want to say that your style has definitely changed and evolved like most artists, but I do recognize your mural work when I went to your website. And I want to remind everyone, if we can quickly, I like to do this early now, what is your website so the people who are listening can actually go to it and see your work? Because we will show some of it, but I'd like for them to actually see it as we're talking.
Okay. It is kellyposeyart.com. It's a little funky because I made it myself, and so it's a little rough.
kellyposeyart.com, KELLYPOSEY art.com. Check it out as we're talking, because I do think that her work is fascinating, and you'll like it. So as we talking and take Kelly off the wall, you can actually take a look at her work. So moving forward, let's talk about your life as an artist. I want to go back to the very beginning. If we can talk about you as a child, do you remember your first time feeling like an artist?
I had a hard childhood. I had two parents who were musicians. They had a child between my youngest sister and I who was really sick. And so I didn't see much of them. I don't remember playing a lot when I was a kid. I don't remember doing much of anything, except I do remember drawing in kindergarten, in fact. And in kindergarten is where I believe my kindergarten teacher said something to my mother like, your child has some artistic talent. And so that was made note of. And my mother, bought me a set of 64 box of Crayolas, which was like, oh my God, it's so amazing. And I started making my own paper dolls. So I was really interested in fashion when I was 5, 6, 7, 8. And so I would make these, paper dolls. With all these different outfits.
What did you create that got your kindergarten teacher's attention?
I don't even remember. It was a simple, drawing your portrait of yourself, like any assignment a kid at that age would have. I think maybe everything was in proportion. There might have been a background, there might have been color, or something that stood out. I do remember. It's kind of embarrassing, but I remember kind of wondering about people's private parts, and I think I got a purple crayon and drew a man and a woman, and my mother she kept this work of art for years and laughed about it, and it was a a man and a woman naked, and at the man was pointing to the woman, and he has a little blurb coming out of his mouth, and I wrote the letter CEONE, which is, I don't know what that is.
CEONE.
And then the woman response, her response, and her blurb was poo. So my mother kept this, and then my mother would like refer to, like, if there was a jerky dude, that she and her friends would joke around and say, oh yes, he was a real Sion. But then she would talk. She gave me not only a talk about what's appropriate to draw, but what is
Interesting.
I was maybe 6. It's the same time that I was making those paper dolls. So
Moving forward, moving forward, and not too much ahead, but moving forward as to when you're a little older, as far as in the household, after the 64 box, piece box of crayons, and you're in the household, and I love to hear about the stories of parents seeing their child artists, and how was that relationship? Was that something you always did? Were you obsessed about it, and did they try to stop you, or did they constantly encourage it? How was that relationship?
Oh, they were supportive. My mother and my father divorced when I was 6, and then my mother married. She dated for a while, and then she married a man, and a few years later, and they would always I'd get a paint set for Christmas, or I got this game called oh my gosh, what's it called? Masterpiece. And it was about art auctioning, and so I learned a lot about art history through that game. And you'd have to auction off, famous works of art, and
wow.
It was fun. It was it's like Monopoly, but there's bidding and everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Who played with you?
Oh, my sister, and her friends, my friends. We would all play, and then actually I still have those games, and I've taken them to school and played them with my own students. Yeah. So.
Wow. So I can imagine. Again, you're listening to Urban Lens Podcast. I'm Steve Gregory. Sitting with me is artist Kelly Posey. I'm really excited to have her here. So I want to again move forward slightly. And you mentioned that your parents divorced when you were 6.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. My parents divorced when I was relatively young, they separated when I was young. I can only imagine how that affected me. And I didn't have the actual creative outlet. How did their divorce affect your creativity or your art?
Well, I can remember this. Okay, so they had joint custody, or I would see my dad on the weekends. And my dad, his thing to do would be to plop us in front of the TV set while he watched sports.
Sounds like me.
And so what I would do is I would just, I'd sit down and start drawing. I'd just make up stories. I was, into the narrative. And then I had I had friends who I would hang out with, and we would, who were artistically inclined as well, and we would do comics. I mean, back then it was the Archies. So we would sit down and draw the, Archie and Veronica and Jughead and Betty, and but then that I think I felt I had a learning disability. So for me it was I had a hard time with reading. I had a hard time with retention. I was actually held back in first grade, so I had a rough beginning. And art
learning disability, I don't mean to cut you off, I'm sorry, but learning disability, I can imagine back then, was it diagnosed as a learning disability?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I don't think they did a great job of helping me overcome the disability, what it is. I still to this day, I have a hard time with reading and writing and comprehension and all of those things. So, I guess I developed some skills to compensate for that. And art was always something that I knew I was good at. Like I knew I wasn't much of a student, and you know, and academically I was challenged. But art was something I felt comfortable with and happiest doing. You know, so it was a good thing for me.
KellyPoseyArt.com is her website. Again, check her out during the interview, after the interview. Support her. I do like to encourage all Urban Lens podcast listeners and viewers to actually buy and support artists, because it's important. You and I were talking in your studio about how it's important to support artists while they're alive.
Yeah.
Because too often when they're dead is when their pieces become worth more than, so much more worth than they are when they're alive. Okay, so I want to, in the intro, in the video, you mentioned Vasily Kandinsky.
Yes. Oh God. Here
So
we
let's
go.
just get this guy out of the way. I mean, Russian painter.
Yes.
He is credited with creating the first recognized abstract piece of work. As I went into your studio, this is the first thing you pulled out. You had this book in your hand and in your pocket, in your little on your being, and it was called Concerning the Spiritual in Art.
Yes.
Right. Kandinsky is interesting. For someone like myself for you to introduce that man to me, that artist to me, and someone like myself, the concepts were incredible. Like I was just all into it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to touch on a few.
Okay.
The first thing, in order to be an authentic artist, he felt like you had to create from an inherent necessity.
Yes.
Talk to me about that. And do you feel that, is that true? Is that true to you? Do you feel like it is something like an artist has to create?
Oh, well, I think a lot of artists would, if they couldn't create, they would shrivel up and die. I can point to myself, that in 15 years where I didn't make art consistently when I was raising children, it almost destroyed me to a point. I was told that I should get back as soon as I can into it. When my kids became, older, and I didn't have to shuttle them around and, do this and that, just only a few years ago, I started making art again. I started getting the courage to make art again. But it's a thing where, if you don't have a creative outlet of some sort, I'm not even speaking about painting or art, visual art making of some sort. If you are at all, if you have a creative spirit at all, you have to nurture that. You have to do that. You have to have a conduit, with your creative self,
And before I get further into Kandinsky, because I want to, something struck me. I'd like to find out, do you remember the first piece of work you created that you liked? That you look like, wow, I'm an artist.
I remember making a piece when I was in college that I thought, I got a very nice critique on.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, I just assume, when I'm making work, when I was back then as a student, you're just doing, you're just making all the time, and you're not. I know my own students, they're just cranking it out, and sometimes they're not really reflecting. And I think getting a good critique, I think, made me realize that there's something here. But when making a work of art, I can't really pinpoint it. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry.
I can't
No.
pinpoint the first time I felt like, oh wow, this is brilliant. I'm brilliant. No, I don't think I've ever felt that.
Right. I can see that.
Man, I'm so
I can
awesome.
see that. I can see that. Touche. Okay, back to Kandinsky.
Okay.
So, something that Kandinsky said really struck me. Again, the book is called, the book he wrote that I'm referring to is Concerning the Spiritual in Art.
Yes.
He wrote that artists create, they create from they inhabit a place on a pyramid from the peak, on the opposite end of a pyramid, and they are moving towards the future. This is what Kandinsky felt.
Okay.
He felt like art in itself, and artists inherently by their existence, artists make things that are avant-garde today,
Yes.
commonplace tomorrow.
Right.
Touch on that.
Well, this is actually you've read a lot. You've done your homework, because this is a new thing on me. And so I guess to piggyback on what you're saying, is that, if we are
I guess in essence, let me put it another way.
okay, go ahead.
Do artists usher in the future is kind of what he's saying. Do they
Oh,
usher in
yeah.
future standards?
Oh, yeah. Well, today, I went to go visit two artists' work studios. Well, one had a show up, and they're part of Sparkplug, and the other one we went to his studio, Alexis Gomez, and then Sophie Lang, and they're communicating, both of them, differently, but on a very high level. That is, to me, speaking about the future. It is speaking about also the past, and we talked about that. That you can't speak about the future without touching on the past. But also, I think both of them are making these investigations, how to make it relevant, even beyond today. We have to, as artists, we have to think about what is, if you're a conceptual artist, if you're a thoughtful artist, you are thinking about it in terms of beyond, does it look nice above the sofa? What is it saying? It's got to be saying something. You have to have a kind of a broad perspective of what it is that you're trying to kind of research and problem solve about. We're problem solvers.
And it's interesting because that coming from someone who was an abstract painter, sometimes the message is obviously for interpretation. Sometimes the message is not clear
Right.
in abstract. So for someone like Kandinsky and yourself to be abstract painters and to talk about the message in it, that just says something. Because if the message is so important, but you can do it through an abstract image, that's pretty powerful. That takes work.
Yeah.
That takes problem solving.
Right. And Kandinsky, what his thing was, is that he is all about the composition. Now, I talked to you about that because I believe that his compositions and his structures and the way that he put things together on the two-dimensional picture plane actually shows sort of a beginning and end and a middle, the way that music does. And it also, the colors speak, towards what area that your eye is drawn to, and then your eye moves over here. And so there's a dialogue happening. It seems to me as though, and it is narrative. Even though it's abstract, it's narrative. And I think my things that I make are narrative, even though I'm not doing, you said you saw things in it.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, let's take a look at it, Jay, if you don't mind. Let's take a look at some of the pieces here. I think we have like 6. And those of you who are listening to the podcast, again, you can look at her work at kellyposeyart.com. In the meantime, can you talk about some of this and what you're talking about, like the message in these? I felt like, sometimes I see sea creatures.
Right.
Sometimes I see like space portals. I see all sorts of things in your work. Talk to me about like the colors you choose and this work and the message that you are trying to convey.
Well, that work in particular, I think what I was just trying to convey is like that this is maybe something that does exist in space. Maybe it's a reality somewhere, and it maybe not in this world, not to the naked eye, but in some world it's there. So it could be in the sea world, it could be in space, it could be, in the fibers of a fabric. those all could be like bacteria or something. But I said it was Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse, which is the title because of the color. And the color to me is kind of, color is very important to me. And this one, I just got finished with, and it looks like a chalkboard to me because of the gray. But then there's this writing, and again, I love the brush. I love making brush strokes, and I love the arabesque. And then the arabesque is a sort of secret symbol or a sacred symbol that that is used a lot. And in fact, the spiral, the arabesque, and then the spiral. The spiral has to do with Fibonacci,
Right.
and you know, that spiral, and my earrings are Fibonacci, as you noticed. So it's all.
So you also got into I see making discs, making round pieces.
Yeah.
How did you get into that? And this is beautiful. What is this one about?
Thank you. Well, I also, you know, because when I'm using color, I'm also trying to like kind of push and pull things apart. If it looks like it's part of a river of things going on in the river, or if it's in it, I call them psychedelic petri dishes. So that the idea is that maybe it's small, you know, it's super small, and we're looking through the lens of a microscope, and there's all this activity going on in there. There's like,
and I see you use the opacity a lot.
Yes.
As far as in the colors, which is fascinating because you wouldn't think to actually, you know, paint something and grading it as far as the opacity level in actual paintings. It's beautiful work.
There's transparency and opacity. So there's, you know, that again, that's a space thing. Like, what is this film, this pink film that's run over?
Exactly. It's amazing stuff. Now this is when I say when I first walked into your studio, I just felt like it was trippy. It was total trippy, and you know, this was one of those ones. I mean, talk to me about this one.
This one is. I've been working on it for a year. So I have one of the women in Sparkplug does these huge paintings. Her name is Katie Humphreys. And Katie Pumphrey does this painting that's big and it's fast, and mine's slow. Mine's the opposite. It's slow, and I'm testing out brush strokes on it. I'm testing out colors. I'm testing out the transparency, the opacity, the composition. How does it start? It started out pretty like bare bones looking, and then I just added all these little things that are kind of moving around, and I'm not done. I mean, this is where it is right now. I think I could be done, and if I did more, what would I do?
I want to ask you about
it's kind of scary.
Since music is such an integral part of your creation process.
Yeah.
What do you listen to when you make work like that?
Well.
What are you listening to? What are you on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, music is and I gotta say, sometimes I'm not listening to music. I'm listening to stories because I love stories. Okay. But most times I'm listening to everything from like, say, Bill Evans, who's worked with Miles Davis, and he's no longer with us, but he's a beautiful jazz composer from the 60s and the 70s. Or I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix, as I said, Band of Gypsies. That's my favorite album. Or this band that my husband and I discovered and that some of my students really liked a few years back, called Grizzly Bear, and they do all this sort of like retro Beatles stuff. So I listen to a lot of and I'll listen to hip hop occasionally. There's some hip hop I like. My son, he's always trying to turn me on. He loves Kendrick Lamar, so I'm listening to Kendrick Lamar. So I'll listen to anything really, as long as it's good.
Right. As far as I want to touch on quickly before we go to break, your college days. I'm interested in seeing you in college because I saw your work obviously in the '90s when you're doing murals inside of clubs, which we'll talk about in the next segment. Yeah. But talk to me about your college days. What was that like for you as a college student?
Well, my parents, my stepfather started this. I went to Europe. Okay, so I went to Europe and I checked it out when I was 21, and I was, I had taken some art classes at MC, and I would put myself through college. So I was one of these people who put themselves through college working and made money on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then went to school on Tuesday, Thursday, and I did that all throughout. And I took a break and I traveled through Europe, and then I came back, and then my parents had a restaurant that went belly up, and they went Chapter 11. And I had been going to these new wave punk clubs in Europe, so I said, "You guys got to check out this stuff." So I took them around, and so I started doing. They made a new wave punk club. So in my college years, they did.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was really fun.
Your parents started new
They made this, and it was called Posers. And it was on 34th and M, and. It was a blast, but I didn't put any of that stuff in my website. I put my work that I did in the classes. Like I had Sam Gilliam was one of my teachers, and Ann Truitt was one of my teachers, and she's a minimalist, like it was really big in the 60s. And Sam, Sam was part of he's like to say he wasn't part of the color school, but he was like a part of this color school. He was part of the color school, and he did these amazing abstract paintings, and so I started doing like these narrative paintings in his class, and he is the type of guy who would we'd have. This is back in the day where you could still drink if you were 18, so he'd buy a couple cases of beer and some pizzas, and we'd have these critiques, and it was fun, and I just painted this whole series where it had to do with the gluttony of the 80s. The 80s was there was they let out all these people from these institutions who had been institutionalized in these horrible institutions. They just let them go on the street, right? And there were so many homeless people on the street. It was like crazy. So there were the homeless people, and then there was people with no money, and then there was really wealthy people, and there was this, all the, it was just, so, and then there was the punk scene, and there was the new, and I was trying to identify with all of that. So I was trying to tell a story about it in a kind of allegorical, animals, chickens.
Right. Your style has evolved to being more abstract.
Yeah.
As you develop as an artist and as you get older and progress in life. Do you think you're making the message more simple for the consumer or for the viewer, or are you making it more complex?
Oh, more complex.
More complex.
Yeah, nobody wants to buy my art. I shouldn't say that.
That's not true.
It's like
that's not true. That's not true at all.
I've had some pieces sell.
Absolutely.
But
sometimes you're the number one seller on the show. I've seen it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I stopped making figurative art or representational art because I teach it. I teach it every day to my students. How to draw, this, how to paint. Where's your perspective?
Right.
Where's it? How do you make the face? How do you make it so it's proportionate? Things like that. And it's important, and I'm glad I know that stuff, and I'm glad I can teach that stuff. That's a gift.
Sounds like you knew that at 6 years old.
Yeah, but it's a
Right.
gift to be and just to throw it out there and give to my students who are trying to learn this stuff, and God knows where they're going to go with it. But I'm of the firm belief that you got to have some technical skill before you can, go out and do. You got to learn how to play classical before you play jazz.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break. When we get back, more from artist Kelly Posey. I want to talk about your students,
Okay.
your life as a teacher,
Okay.
revisit Kandinsky,
Okay.
and then also take a look at your murals from the club scene in D.C. in the 90s.
Thank you.
Stay tuned right here to Urban Lens Art Podcast. I'm Steve Gregory, and again, you're listening to listenvision.com. This is Urban Lens. One-on-one interviews with breaking artists and the history of art itself.
Basquiat, Picasso, Emory Douglas, Rembrandt, Motley,
Georgia O'Keeffe,
Kadir Nelson,
Luis Bourgeois,
Michelangelo,
Yayoi Kazama,
Donatello,
Agnes Martin,
Da Vinci,
Faith Ringgold,
Van Gogh,
Frida Kahlo,
Gauguin,
Yoko Ono.
Romer Birden.
What I'm trying to capture. I mean, you know, I really like Vasily Kandinsky. You know him? And he's the godfather of all this stuff. I mean, he actually, you know, at the turn of the century started doing non-objective art and saying that it was to music. And so I kind of, I feel that. Yeah, I feel that is where I am. I mean, and if I could bring it into the 21st century, just still using the same materials that have been used since the beginning of time, when the cavemen first took like some pig hairs and scraped it on the side of a cave to create dialogue. I mean, it's very primitive. This is all primitive stuff, you know, and it's all sort of like in the back of the brain, so that part of the brain that has to go with, I guess, just survive.
And welcome back. I'm Steve Gregory. This is Urban Lens Podcast. With me is the one and only Kelly Posey. Where do I start? I want to go back to Kandinsky. This guy, Vasily Kandinsky. One of his concepts as well. I got really into his concepts, and I want to thank you again for introducing them to me. Mm-hmm. But music, he felt like he actually gave colors tones and colors notes. I think he gave yellow like a C or a C note, and he really got deep into the merger or the what am I trying to say here? He really expressed how music is the same as art.
Right.
How creating paintings is the same as creating music.
Right.
It seems as though you feel the same way. You're that in tune with music and art.
Mm-hmm.
Your opening scene, I want Jay to go to some of these pictures. Your opening artwork, as far as to the public, as far as I can see, was murals in nightclubs in the
Right.
90s. I mean, it seems like that's your first step, which is usually people's last step.
Yeah.
Or like their third step. But you're doing this 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Talk
looked
to me
like
about how did you get selected and commissioned to do murals in clubs in the 90s?
Well, I mean, I I was a barfly.
That's easy. Okay. That's one way to do it. They had to see your artwork.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, so Al Jericho had Chief Ikes, and he had also done
The fifth column. There's one more,
Yeah.
Jay, of one that she did, the
Fifth
fifth
column.
column, which is also beautiful. Yeah, it's that one right there.
That's the sex monster.
That's what that is.
Yeah.
Which was the fifth column. If anybody knows the fifth column in the 90s.
She's got
Right.
about 4 or 5 breasts there.
And I believe
yeah.
there's one more as well. And all
And
this
it's
work,
just like
all this work you can see on our website at kellyposeyart.com. Again, that's kellyposeyart.com. And this one, where was this one?
This is at Rancho Deluxe, which was a failed restaurant that Al Jericho also did. He purchased 2 of the murals. One of them is actually right now at what is it called, Slash Run, which is a small bar near here in Petworth somewhere.
Which one?
I don't know. It's like up there somewhere.
No, which mural?
The Chief Ike's Mama Room one.
How did they get it?
They bought it from Al. They bought it from Al for a lot more than Al paid me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow.
Like 4 times more.
Wow. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about your life as a teacher. Let's kind of come forward.
Yeah.
It's important because a lot of people see teaching as, especially for artists, as not the sexiest job.
No,
in the
it's
world.
hard.
But it's important. It's important. So talk to me about how you got into teaching and what you like and dislike about it. As far as an artist perspective.
Okay. Well, I love my students. I love my classes, my classrooms. I try to make them inviting. The classroom, I play music. I have track lighting, so I kind of dim it a little bit, so it's like you're walking into a nightclub or something.
I wish I had you as a teacher already.
We play, so it's really chill in there, and my kids are really talented, So I teach on-level kids, and I like my on-level kids because they're just learning, and then I teach upper level.
What does on-level mean?
On-level means that they're basically just learning. They're taking the class because they have to fulfill a requirement or something like that. So, and you get everybody. You get, the kids that my counselor put me in this class and I don't know how to
The
draw.
jocks.
And no, actually got some jocks who can make art.
Great.
It's amazing.
Great.
But, so you get what I call the good, the bad, the ugly.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all, I don't have a problem with anybody, really. There in the beginning, when I first started teaching, I did, because I had to learn classroom management. And I think a lot of classroom management is just making the curriculum, exciting enough that they're going to want to do it and that they can identify with it. So even, and when they're kids who are in AP classes and the IB, which is International Baccalaureate Program, and they are a different type of fish. We have all these different fish. So they get to do what they want. So everybody gets to kind of be their own artist in there. They get a little bit of structure, and then you just give them enough push and they're on their way, and everybody's they want you to come and help them, and I see where they can make it better. And teenagers are really wanting, they have a really kind of they have a preconceived notion of the way they want things to look, and if it doesn't turn out the way they want it to look and they get very upset. And so they get a little. So the idea is just to kind of say, okay, it's all right. This is all right, and maybe it didn't turn out well, but look at what you learned to do here, and then you can apply it to the next thing.
Absolutely. You have one student that went on to do some pretty big things.
Yeah.
And go ahead and expound on that, especially her protest of her university and actually challenging her university's tuition rate.
That's Victoria Sobel, and she's one of the first kids I taught when I first started teaching high school. I taught elementary school for 7 years before that. But she doesn't even know I'm talking right now, I bet. But she's in New York, and she just, she was an exceptional kid from the get-go. She's very strong-willed. She's always we moved into a new building. This is an example. We moved into a new building.
What year is she in high school? At the time.
At the time, she was a junior or a senior. She was a senior. And we moved in, we were in this old dilapidated building. It was falling apart, and they built a new building, and we all moved in there. And there was a gallery. They built a gallery in there. And she's like, Miss Posey, we're going to have an art show. And I'm like, oh my God, I just got finished moving everything over here and, over the winter break. And she says, you don't have to do a thing. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. I'm going to just no, we're going to do it. And this is the way she has been her whole life. And in fact, when they did a documentary on her because she took over Cooper Union, which is free if you get in, but they were charging tuition the year that she had graduated, and so she had been on Occupy. She'd been part of Occupy Wall Street, and she occupied the Cooper Union. She and her friends occupied the president's office and took it over for 3 months, and they were like sleeping on the floor in sleeping bags. They got a hold of all his files. They were going through his computers. They were like, they were renegades. And then they were able to sit down and talk things out with Cooper Union, and I think they were able to negotiate a sort of a happy medium where the kids don't have to pay that much. But Cooper Union is super duper rich, and they screwed up. They had all this money that they didn't invest properly, and they thought that to charge the students would be the answer. It would only be a drop in the bucket, because they were like $1 trillion in debt or some crazy crap. I don't know. It was a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Anyway, she was on national television. She was on the New York Times. You know, they did a documentary about her and other institutions that charge way, way, way too much money for students to get an education, and she had wanted to spearhead a movement where, you know, education should be free. And I believe her. I believe that. I mean, I didn't have to pay that much when I was going to school. And I mean, I think you know, I'm putting my own kids through school, and it's scary. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of money. And, you know, then what's the guarantee when you get out? What they're going to be able to do, if they're going to get a job? Are you actually going to be able to use this degree? Is it worth it? And, you know, so she's pretty amazing. So she ended up at the Whitney Museum last year in the biennial, and I have other students too that you know, I have a lot of art students that have gone on to art school and stuff. I mean,
which is an accomplishment itself.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and gotten scholarships and all that stuff.
On a more somber note,
yes,
you lost both your parents this year.
Yes.
That has to be, you know, on an emotional level, it has to be pretty much a blow, a pretty heavy blow, losing both your parents in 1 year. It seems like you're very close to your parents. Talk to me how that has affected you on an artistic level, or has it?
Well, you know, my mother was a jazz singer, and she had a good career for a long time, and then she stopped maybe about in the late 90s. So I'd say about 20 years ago. It's hard to talk about it, but my mom, you know, was supportive of me at being an artist, and my stepfather. We're all grieving because it was a pretty traumatic watching her, you know, just die, and I like when I was driving here, I was listening to Larry Applebaum, and what did they put on? They put on Shirley Horn's "Here's to Life," and that's one of my mother's favorite songs.
Do you remember her singing that song?
She never sang it because Shirley sang it, and Shirley sang the hell out of that song. You know, who's gonna try to top Shirley Hill? Right. Shirley Horn was like, she's fucking brilliant. Right. Excuse my language, like. Excuse me.
You're fine.
Anyway, but you know, it's hard for me to process. Only the one thing I can say is that it's made me, for my art, it's made me think, okay, I'm of the opinion that, you know, YOLO. Right. You just have, all I got is today. Right. All I got is today. And so today is the day that has to count. And so I actually have a prayer in the morning that I do, and a meditative process, and I do some journaling, and I suit up, and I go out there, and when I make art, now that I make art, I feel like it's a soul food for me. It's everything I do has to help me to kind of put myself in the proper mindset that if I were to get hit by a bus today, I had this good life. It's sort of like who's that guy? I'm sorry, I'm like stammering. Steve Jobs,
Right.
he said, and you look in your mirror every day and you ask yourself, have I done everything? And so I think, we all need to have that. And am I being the best person I can be?
Your father, you haven't mentioned your father remarrying.
He did.
He did remarry.
Mm-hmm.
What was he like towards the end of his life, and how is his passing affecting you as far as artistically?
Well, my dad, he had a degenerative disease called multiple systems atrophy. And it started when he was like 64. My stepmother had passed away. She's gone now 10 years. And she and he married like maybe a year after my parents divorced. And so I'd spent the weekends in front of the TV with her too. So it was, I'm part of that generation, I guess. I don't know.
And your father played the clarinet?
No, he played jazz trumpet.
He played trumpet.
Yeah.
He played trumpet.
So he played with, my mom and my dad met playing, she was singing, or he was playing in Woody Herman's band, and then he met her, and she was like 19 years old, and then the singer got sick, and Woody Herman asked if she could sing, and she said yeah, and then he put her on, and she sang, and he said, you're hired, and so she started singing with him. So they traveled with him a bit, and then my dad also, he played with Charlie Bird, who was a jazz guitarist, bossa nova dude from so he played with like Stan Getz and folks like that, Astrid Gilberto. So so they had my dad got sick, and then he had a slow decline, and then he spent 8 years in a nursing home, and it was horrible. And so those are the reasons why I'm not taking this life for granted. I don't want to. What happens if that happens? If that happens, I have some ideas about that. And I was either Amsterdam or Oregon.
Right. Right.
Get me in the car and let's go.
Right.
Or plane, I don't care.
Right.
He did what he did, and he was good at it, and I remember being very proud of both of them when I was little.
It seems like a fascinating life as a kid, just to see these two musicians who are playing with, Astrid Gilberto, Stan Getz. These are very accomplished groups and people that are around.
And Cuter Betts,
Incredible. So I guess, did you feel almost like the on the lower, as far as ranking as artists in the family, did you feel like you were on the lower end of the totem pole?
This is it, yeah, because they were trying to hone in on their craft, and they were interested in that spotlight that was on them, and so I was I had piano lessons by the time I was 13. Which was kind of late, and I didn't have any interest in it. I was kind of a mess. Frankly, I had a rough childhood into adulthood kind of thing. But I think that art was the thing that saved me. And I'm pretty, like, my work is, if you haven't noticed, is pretty strong. It's not mellow crap.
Absolutely.
So it's like very in your face. So I feel like I'm like the little lion that roared, or was the mouse that roared. What is that story?
Absolutely. Again, this is Urban Lens Podcast. I'm Steve Gregory. With me is artist Kelly Posey. I thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Is it over?
Nope, it's not over. But
okay.
I just want to say thank you in ahead of time, because sometimes I run up against a break,
Okay.
as the viewers and listeners could tell you. But I wanted to ask you, you met someone who I am definitely fond of, and you mentioned it in passing. We're actually saying goodbye to each other. You're like, oh, I met Gordon Parks.
Yeah.
Gordon Parks, photographer, definitely shot some incredible work during Harlem.
Yeah.
In Harlem, during Harlem Renaissance. And I want to ask you about that meeting.
Oh, it was really cool. Well, the thing with that is that I had a friend who was a painter, and I hung out with her quite a bit. I was living in New York, and then I came back up to visit her, and I was staying in her apartment, and she's like, okay, well, you know, I got to do this and that, but, you know, you can hang in my apartment, but I got to get a recommendation from Gordon Parks. And I'm like, I'm coming.
Did you know who he was at the time?
Oh, yeah, I knew. And I'm like, and she was just, she needed a recommendation because she was going to get she's going to try to get a grant, right? And so we went uptown, and he lived near the UN, so he lived on the east side, and it was really pretty apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, he had a grand piano, and he had all these photographs. And
How old was he at the time?
I think he might have been in his 80s, and he had a bathrobe on and a little, like an ascot or something. He was really cool, you know.
Yeah.
He's just real mellow, and it's okay. Wait here a minute, girls, and you can look around. And so
You
we
seen any
did.
of his work and his
Oh yeah,
his pictures?
oh
wow.
yeah, they're all framed and
Wow.
just laying around his apartment, and his, you know, beautiful view of the East River, and you know, he was just, I mean, I wish we could have stayed and chatted, but we didn't. He said he was busy, and she was very effusive. Oh, thank you, you know, this means so much to me. And he's like, oh, that's cool. It's, you know.
Was the paintbrush always your instrument, or did you ever pick up a music instrument and liked it?
No, but I like to sing.
Oh, you do sing. Did you get your mother's voice?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, wow.
I think all us girls got our mother's voice
Wow.
or sense of humor or something. But, you know, I look like her. I look exactly like my mother. So that's kind of scary.
I would
My
I
stepfather.
would ask you to
but-
sing, but I won't do that to you on the spot. But I would ask you to sing.
no.
I won't do that to you on the spot. And that would be really taking you off the wall. We'll do that next time. I wanted to get back to you as an artist. Again, like I said, your work is evolving into just really total abstract, completely. Even though the message is strong, it's
Right.
becoming more and more abstract. What's next for you? Is this a series, or is this it for you from now on? Are you getting deeper into this, or is what's next for Kelly Posey as an artist?
Well, you know, I can't, because I've been mourning a little bit. This is like, I haven't been really thinking about what's going to happen with my career, although I do have a friend who has a house in Baltimore, and they're doing these pop-up galleries in Baltimore and home.
It's really popular now as far as artists.
Yeah, so there's that, and then I'm thinking about actually a thought in progress here. I'm thinking about possibly showing my work in science facilities, or maybe.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
It looks like something under a slide.
The lab.
For sure.
Like
Yes.
the lab, right?
It makes sense. It is definitely a lot going on in your artwork. I want to say I love it. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thank you.
Is there any more murals in your future? Or have you given up the mural?
Oh, you know, I mean, I could do one. I mean, if I had the time, like summer's my best time to work.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think I've seen a lot of people painting murals in the summer, indoor, outdoor. So, yeah, I could be up.
You ever
for
think
doing-
about yourself as a trendsetter in that respect? Because obviously, you know, in the 90s, you know, I've said that murals, that's before they were trending online. There was no Instagram. There was no
All right.
any of that. So you were doing murals really kind of ahead of the time. They were always around, but to do that type of mural in that type of setting is definitely ahead of its time. You ever consider yourself a trendsetter in that respect?
Maybe, but now, you know, like one of the people in my spark plug group for DCAC, Katie Pumphrey, she does murals. Like she'll do these So I don't know what they're called, like art salon parties, or they're like sort of cocktail parties where they have muralists working right there and then while everybody's sipping on a cocktail.
And you never dropped down the player card? I've been doing this since '93. That hasn't happened.
Well, I mean, I've been doing it, but also other people had been
Oh, of
doing it
course.
back then,
Of course,
So, I
of
mean,
course.
Keith Haring, come on now.
Yes, of course, of course.
Basquiat, I think there are a
course.
few murals laying around there from these guys, but yeah, I love the idea of working big. I mean, working big and then telling a
That's
story.
interesting to hear you say that, because usually artists tend to shy away from it once they've gone back to canvas. They tend to feel like that's interesting.
I mean, it takes a lot of work. It's very physical.
Mm-hmm.
That's why in the summertime, I think I'd be more like, I'd have my, all my strength. I mean, when I'm toiling with those kids, I mean, that's a job and a half,
What's more intimidating, a canvas or a wall?
Oh, neither one.
Neither one?
Neither one are intimidating to me.
Okay. Okay, I want to ask you quickly about your sister. You mentioned her before we go. Is she an artist?
Which one?
You have two sisters.
I have three.
You have three sisters?
Yeah.
Wow. Are any of them artists?
I have one that's close to me in age who is pretty good. I have another sister who's a photographer, and I got my youngest sister who's the stand-up comic.
So no musicians.
Look at that. No.
Four daughters.
I don't know how that
from
happened.
two musical parents.
I
and
don't
no
know how that.
musician.
We talk about that. That's a thing that us girls talk about, and I just think my mom was like, I'm the singer of the family. I mean, she was, she was, and she was a strong presence, and she had, I think she nurtured us in different ways, but that was her niche, So and that's okay. I mean, I feel like I'm making music with
Absolutely.
with the painting.
And using Kandinsky's words, I feel like the future's okay as long as you're helping usher the future in.
Yeah.
So thank
Thank
you very
you.
much. Yes, absolutely. This is Urban Lens Podcast. I'm Steve Gregory. We're going to be signing off. We'll see you next time. Next Sunday, again, check out Kelly Posey's work at kellyposeyart.com. That is KELLYPOSEY art.com. She's also on Instagram, but she hasn't made many posts, but I will prod her about
Please
that.
forgive the graphics.
Yes. Stay tuned. See you next Sunday. Keep it locked right here to listenvisionlive.com.
All right.
Art means story, life story, and bringing people together. It's a connector. It's your pain. It's your agony. It's what your perspective in the world is.
Art can be beautiful and art can be ugly.
Beautifully ugly.
This is Urban Lens. Urban Lens.